making a life in music, I think, is a real blessing to be able to do that. I constantly try to keep that first and foremost in my mind. And I would say to anybody who's aspiring, especially, to be a musician, just make sure that that you feel that way about music, because otherwise it's a tremendously challenging and can be very, very difficult way to try to make a life for yourself. So you really have to love it beyond measure.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Beautiful Work Podcast. I am your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the trials and the triumphs of their chosen field. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, athletes, and everything in between. We peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Well, it is out, released on Friday, January the 18th, my new record, Grandeur. It's about a week that it's been out, and I am just so thrilled for it to be out, and thank you to all of you who have already ordered it and downloaded it. Honestly surpassing my thoughts of the first week of it being out, and so thank you guys so much for doing that. If you're new to the podcast, my name's Dan Krikorian, and besides this podcast, I'm also a musician, and my fifth record, Grandeur, just came out January the 18th. This episode today, featuring Byron, is part of the mini-series of the Beautiful Work Podcast, all about the different people who were involved in making the new record, Grandeur. So you can find it on iTunes, stream it on Spotify, Apple Music, Bandcamp, CD Baby. It's everywhere. So just search my name, Dan Krikorian, and Grandeur on your favorite listening device, and I hope you check it out and hope you like it. As well as listening to it, I hope you are enjoying the podcasts. We are continuing to garner a steady and loyal following, so thank you guys so much for following along. If you could, please think about leaving maybe a comment or a rating on iTunes. That really helps drive up the podcast in the searches. Or also think about signing up for our newsletter on dankrikorian.com, and I'll send you something once a month with updated information about this podcast, music, and some other fun stuff as well. All right, I'm really excited today to be hosting and to share this interview with Byron. Carl has been a tremendous help to my music over the years. He's worked on the last 4 records with me as a keyboard, accordion player. He's got a great musical mind and has been around the business for many years and is very highly respected as an LA studio and live musician. So can't wait to share his story. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Hailed by the Los Angeles Times as a, quote, musical ace, Byron is a keyboardist and composer who records and performs with a wide range of artists and ensembles as an in-demand sideman, a session musician, arranger, and music director. He has toured internationally, collaborates with dance and theater groups, and is a founder of the acclaimed gypsy jazz ensemble, the Hot Club of Los Angeles, and also a proud member of the world-famous Sin City All-Stars. Born in Lebanon and raised in Cambodia, Congo, Mozambique, Turkey, and the US, Byron studied composition with esteemed Cuban-American composer Aurelio de la Vega at Cal State University Northridge. Carl's credits as a sideman include work with artists such as Jackson Browne, Jeff Bridges, Jack Black, Moby, Austin Hanks, Spencer Davis Group, Shane Alexander, and the list goes on and on and on. Some of the renowned producers he has recorded with include David Kahn, Dusty Wakeman, Ed Tree, and Sean Norse. Of Byron's musical compositions, the New York Amsterdam News wrote, quote, "He is a first-rate talent. He is a composer who combines intellect with a loving heart." The San Francisco Chronicle hailed his composition Birds of Sorrow as a, quote, "dramatic metaphor," and the Village View praised Byron's, quote, "deft, harmonically ambitious work, a special treat throughout." Carl also teaches at the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles, and I have had the pleasure of working with him on my last 4 records, including the recent Grandeur. Carl is here today to discuss his life in music, spending his youth abroad, and his love of literature. Okay, I am joined now by Carl Byron. Carl, thanks so much for coming on the podcast this morning.
Happy to be here.
All right, well, let's start off with it's about 8:15 in the morning, and we're both getting up to do stuff for the day. What does a typical day look like for you, though, as a full-time recording musician?
I don't know if I have any really typical days, but I guess some things are fairly consistent. The general scope of what I do can vary so much. I guess that the first thing would be getting up early is generally part of the going to bed late and getting up early are generally part of it. And so anyway, it's going to depend, for instance, whether I'm going to be doing some session work or whether I'm going to be working on some stuff at home. So whether I'm going out or whether I have maybe a live gig that day or that evening or a rehearsal someplace or sessions. So just looking back, for instance, over the last few weeks, I can tell you that I had some days where I got up and was out of the house around 9 something or other to get to a session maybe that was starting around 10 a.m. And then after that was done, maybe in the mid or late afternoon, I was working on maybe some arrangements or some charts for another project. And that evening I might have had a gig or a rehearsal. So that's a very loose thing. And then I also teach usually 3 days a week at Musicians Institute. So if it's during the quarter, which is each quarter is 10 weeks long, then 3 days a week I'd be doing that primarily for 3 days of the week. And then maybe after those teaching hours, then doing whatever, recording or rehearsing or doing some kind of a live performance.
Busy days. And I think the one thing I've always really admired about you when working with my stuff is how efficient you are in the studio and how much you can get done in such a short amount of time. And is that something that you've just gotten better at as you've, through the years, working with so many musicians and doing so much session work, that you've just gotten quicker and quicker and more efficient? Or is that always kind of been your MO?
I definitely hope I've gotten better. I mean, I think that's that's something to strive for. Every day I'm trying to improve in some way in all areas of my life. As far as my MO, I feel like, yes, you do get a certain amount of experience, and so even though I'm trying to work with every artist and every artist project on an individual basis and approach it all like it's brand new and everyone's unique, I know that the methods or the ways that I think about music can perhaps translate from one situation to another. So yeah, certain techniques, certain strategies are going to be part of the equation. And then on another level, I guess just as a musician, having done a lot of things over the years, the ability to understand what's going on in a piece of music, whatever the genre, I think that improves for all of us. And we get to a point where we're better at analyzing what's going on. And then that helps to guide you as a player. So in the case of what we're talking about right now as a session musician, when you're recording, then I think you're better at getting a sense of, okay, what would I do to contribute to this song to help it do what the artist and the producer are looking for it to do, and how can I best achieve that in this moment? So those are things that I've probably gotten better at doing.
And do you remember when you were able to go into a session and just not have to think so much about, the key or the changes, or just you were able to just feel the music and kind of know where it should go? Like, was there a time when you had done it so much or were starting to do it so much that it just became really natural to hear a song, know what it needs, and be able to give it to that song as quickly as possible?
That's a good question. I think that I try not to take anything for granted, even if I might be working on material by different artists that often has a lot of that could have a lot of similarities. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's no secret that a huge number of songs use a lot of similar kind of processes as far as maybe harmonic stuff or melodic and groove things. So the temptation is to just show up and like my standard joke and just use both of my licks, which is one of the things that a lot of players will talk about, or turn it into just another day at the office. But so that in a way, I think experience teaches. I think it teaches us, and I know some of my colleagues, I mean, we've discussed this, that sometimes is the thing that is the challenge, is to always approach something like it's new. So yeah, I've certainly had instances where I felt more comfortable and more confident about, okay, I'm not, maybe I'm not 100% sure of exactly what's going to happen here, and what direction this might go once I start putting in what I'm doing, and then the artist and the producer react to that and all that. But I might be feeling like, okay, I can do this, and I'm not intimidated by it. That I can recall getting to a point where I felt more like that, rather than when I was younger and I was first starting to do this. And well, actually, when I was younger and I first started doing it, I was, as the saying goes, I was so young I knew it all, right?
Right.
But then I did get to a point once I got past that. I did get to a point where I definitely felt a little bit more like, oh no, I really have a lot to learn, and yada yada, and then maybe some anxiety or some concern about, am I really up to this? And then you get over that hurdle, and then you approach stuff like, okay, this needs to be special. You need to bring something special to everything that you do, even if you just play one note. it's got to be, that note has to be special in and of and by itself. You're contributing something that should be unique to the song to help the song, because the song and the artist and all of that
Right.
is unique. So those are, I mean, I know that's a long answer to your question.
It's great.
But that's, in a way, it's a difficult question, I think, for not just for me, but for a lot of us to answer. 'Cause, I mean, I know a lot of my colleagues who we kind of struggle a little bit with that. Okay, I'm not talking about an existential struggle that necessarily keeps us up at night, but something that when you're in the moment in the studio, you realize, okay, I'm probably just going to play something really, really simple right here, but it's got to be the exact right kind of simple.
Right.
And then on the flip side, you have those instances where you need to do something that might be quite technically demanding. And then it's, okay, now I need to call on whatever experience I have and whatever chops I have to be able to, just from a technical standpoint, execute this and do it in a reasonable amount of time. I mean, so we're not here for 2 hours playing the same 2 bars over and over again until I get it right.
Right. Listening to you talk about that experience and going to the studio, I don't know if people realize sometimes, not necessarily how difficult the working environment can be, but how much pressure that you must feel at times when you go into a studio. And I guess it depends on the artist you're working with or the producer and your relationship with them. But, you're coming in, you're listening to a piece of music for the first time. I'm giving you some charts that aren't very good, speaking of myself, and you always help out on making sure my charts are better. But I've always been amazed at, for me, from working with you in an instance where you'll take a song and, we'll talk briefly a little bit about what it might feel like or what I might be thinking. And then you can add what's needed or then add something as well that I wasn't even thinking about. And all of a sudden I'm driving home 2 or 3 hours later listening to it, and it's almost taken on a different form. And I can't tell me how many times I've gone home thinking, wow, how did Carl do that? And I'm sitting there looking at you while you're playing, and it's got to be something that at times is rewarding for you. And I'm sure, like you talked about earlier on, there's some pressure there.
Yeah, I think one of the important elements that you'll find all musicians will note is that it's really vital to listen. Mm-hmm. That's a huge part. Well, whether we're talking recording or whether we're talking live performance or whatever. And I think over the years, you listen to so much music, whether it's the music you're making that you're involved with, or of course, recordings and other people and hearing other people live. So when you're in the moment in a situation you're describing, that's in there. You may not even be that conscious of it, but it's influencing, it's having an effect on how you approach what it is that you're recording, even like what kind of sound should I try to use, or what register of the instrument would be effective in this case based on where the vocal is, or what other instruments are doing that are already on the track. What kind of genre is this? Mm-hmm. So those things are all going on. Some of them I'm more conscious of some of them than I am of others. In some cases, what we, I guess, sometimes think of it as instinct might take over, but I'm pretty sure that sort of instinct idea is really just a lot of years of experience and training that I'm just not consciously thinking through it
right
at that point, but it's all part of the process.
Well, Carl, let's go back into early days with you and kind of work back up to where you are now. And so you were born in Lebanon and then raised in Cambodia, Congo, Mozambique, Turkey, and the U.S. That's pretty unique. Can you talk about that and that experience growing up?
Yeah, of course, at the time it seemed kind of normal to me.
Right,
But,
right. That's right.
I mean, that's what I knew. Yeah, it was really interesting. I guess that's one thing I can say is that a fair amount of my childhood, I was exposed to different cultures, which in my case, I think that was a really good thing. The reason was that my dad was with the State Department, the U.S. Foreign Service, and that's and he was stationed in his assignments were in those countries.
Okay.
And so that's where the family moved. We returned to the U.S. when I was going on about 15, which was pretty massive culture shock at that point. And then, I mean, I didn't quite understand some things about the U.S., which I think helped me to see things with somewhat fresh eyes. And I'm still missing whole segments of pop culture, and I'm still deficient in certain areas of trivia when people talk about whatever it is, could be certain TV shows or trends or things like that happened maybe in the 70s, and I just kind of, I'm not that clued into them, or I've read about them, but I didn't experience them.
Okay. Of all those countries, is there one or two that really stick out in your memory as having, you still think about it or you still visit?
Yeah. Well, Lebanon and Turkey mostly, because my mom's family is from Lebanon. She's originally Lebanon.
Okay.
So few relatives there. And then Turkey, because that's simply where we wound up the longest. We wound up being there for 6 years. And then also while we were living in Turkey, it was a lot easier for us to visit with my mom's family in Lebanon because they're not too far away. And in fact, I was there for just a couple of weeks in the fall this year, reconnecting with some folks. So that those are the two.
Okay.
I mean, all the places that we lived did definitely have an influence, but those two, I think, have remained a little bit more significant.
Sure. And what did music look like in your family growing up?
Music was, well, oh yeah. So that's the other thing. For instance, we just talked about my lack of knowledge about certain things. At the time, I didn't realize it, but it was a real blessing because my mother's family especially were very active in the classical music, in classical music in Lebanon, and because my dad was quite an aficionado of classical music, I grew up primarily at home, at least, with a lot of classical music going on.
Okay.
And I was, and then of course I took piano lessons and so on. But my mom had been trained at the conservatory in Beirut. Her older sister remained a teacher there forever. For instance, she had a cousin, my second cousin, who had a career for a while, at least into his 30s, as a concert pianist. So a lot of that was going on, and they wound up knowing. For instance, by the time when we got to Turkey, and I was becoming a little bit more aware of music in general, by that point they had started to have even some musical evenings at home with some Turkish and expat classical musicians who would come and play some chamber music. So that was a lot of what I experienced, and then some local music too. What I didn't experience a lot was Western pop music.
Mm.
So when we got back to to the U.S. And then that was a real discovery. It was a real discovery for me once I became a teenager. I mean, then I started going through that phase of rebelling a bit and wanting to get into rock and roll and all of that. But yeah, the earlier stuff, I mean, it was a pretty heavy dose of classical, a little bit of Broadway.
Okay.
Not much in the way of other styles of music other than what I heard out in the streets.
And when you came to the U.S. and got into, the Western music, like you talked about, who were the artists that you remember at the time that made the biggest impact?
Early on, even though they had long since broken up, for whatever reason, it was the Beatles.
Okay.
And then from there, kind of a typical trajectory, Rolling Stones, and a lot of people of that ilk, and then blues and jazz. And I was fortunate enough, for instance, to take a summer when I was in high school, to take a summer jazz program at a college in Maryland, where I got at least the beginnings or sort of a semi foundation of appreciation for jazz.
Okay. And through all this time, you stuck with the piano. Did you ever experiment with any stringed instruments, guitar, bass, or did you kind of always know the keys were going to be where you wanted to be?
That was a main focus. I did for a while, though. I had a few years there where I was actively out there as a singer-songwriter, bashing away on a guitar.
Wow, I did not know that. That's great.
That was that. Yeah, I mean that. And when we were talking earlier about experience and what I might bring to stuff, that's part of, I think, what informs how I work, particularly in certain genres, because I've kind of done that in my own way. Not that I was that great at it, but I have a sense of what it's like. I know what it's like to write songs. For instance, I mean, I still do write songs, but to, for instance, be using guitar in that kind of situation and to perform that way.
And what made you move back to not doing that?
I think it was realizing, well, I was getting paid to play keyboards.
Okay.
That was, I mean, what to the extent that I ever made any money as a singer, as a guitar-based singer-songwriter, it was pretty minimal compared to what I was able to do on keyboards. So, I mean, it's still there. I mean, every once in a while, I'll just for fun, I'll pick up a guitar and do some just stuff. Although I'm pretty rusty to the extent that I ever had any kind of chop whatsoever.
Okay. So you come to the U.S. and start, getting into the Western musical culture and whatnot. And then you go and you study at Cal State Northridge, correct? And I don't want to mispronounce his name, but the composer that you study with?
Oh, yeah. Right. Aurelio de la Vega.
Yes. You said it better than I would have.
Okay.
So you studied with him for, 3-4 years?
Yeah, roughly.
And then...
Yeah. He was not the only person, but he was the most significant person, I guess, at the time that I studied with there.
And then was there a time, or when did you feel that music would be your life? Like, did you do other stuff, or did you potentially go into other careers, or did you always know this is where you wanted to be or were going to go?
Yeah, I was already pretty much set on that path. I had already been working as a musician, and even though I might not have been earning my living full time as a musician, that was the main focus of what I was doing. So when I went to Cal State Northridge, I was actually a returning student by that point. I had started college and then I hadn't finished, and so I was returning by that point. So I'd been working in the interim as a musician. So that, I would say by my early 20s, I was pretty much figuring, okay, this is definitely what my passion is. Now, then the question was, how do I turn that passion into a realistic way of earning a living?
And in the process of finding a way to make a living doing music and playing it full time, what are some of the things that someone who on the outside looking in or listening to this conversation, what are some things that are more difficult in starting to make money and as a studio musician or performing musician? What's hard? What's the harder things about that?
Getting yourself connected, first of all, so that people even know that you exist. That's
right.
That's a huge part of it, because unlike, let's say, what we might think of as more conventional types of jobs or careers, you don't really see job openings, or you don't go through Craigslist usually and see a listing for session player wanted, blah blah blah. Or if you do see that, it's going to be for something relatively small, and it may not even pay very much. So it's just not as formalized as, let's say, some other areas. Now, other areas of music, if you were to go into, let's say, being an orchestral player, or for instance, in the education field, yes, then you do have a much more formalized kind of way of going about it. And that's the avenue that a lot of people take. But for instance, being someone who does what I do, which is essentially being a freelance musician, and you're or an independent contractor, if you want to look at it that way, you're not only doing the work, you're also the person who has to find the work and promote yourself and network and do all of those things. I guess it's a little bit closer on some level to being maybe an actor. Mm-hmm. Although even there, you have a little bit more of an institutionalized kind of situation.
Sure.
So yeah, this is it's a field where you cross over into a lot of different areas. And that's why, for instance, like some of us, in my case, and some of my colleagues, we do other things that are music related, such as like teaching at Musicians Institute, or for instance, working on projects where we arrange stuff, or we might music direct for something. And so it might not entirely 100% be just the act of playing your instrument, either on recordings or in live situations.
Let's talk about playing live now. And I know that, a large amount of what you do a lot of studio work, but you also play out live quite often, all the time. And, you're a founding member of Hot Club of Los Angeles. You do work on your own. You have your own stuff. Is there a different feeling that you get at this point in your career when you're going out to play a live gig as opposed to when you're going to a studio?
Yes, yeah, because they're different animals for the most part. Just the nature of the environment and what you're delivering. I mean, when you're performing live, that's the whole point. It's happening right there in the moment, and then it's gone. It's not usually, unless you're recording a live performance that then people will listen to after the fact. Usually it's just something that is ephemeral.
Yeah.
Whereas a recording session the whole point is to document something so that people will listen to it, and you're hoping that they will listen to it more than once. So you approach it from that standpoint too. I mean, I know that I might take more chances in some ways live than I would on a record. I mean, it depends also on the kind of band or the kind of artist that what the genre of music is too. But then live too, it depends on the place, on the type of venue. I mean, if I'm doing a big concert kind of situation, that's going to usually involve a certain type of presentation. If it's an intimate type of club, like you mentioned, the Hot Club of Los Angeles, this gypsy jazz band that I started back in 2011, we rarely rehearse, for instance. So very often, because we have a residency, because we usually play on average once a week, sometimes more often, we will try stuff out live. I mean, we will maybe ahead of time discuss something about the particular number that we're going to do. But I mean, that's so it's going to vary quite a bit. It'd be everything from very, very almost choreographed and highly arranged types of concert situations to things that might be more informal and where you might take more chances.
And someone like yourself that has so much experience and plays so often, how do you keep things fresh and exciting for you musically?
That's a really good question. I guess at times it can be a little bit of a challenge. I think I referenced that joke earlier about using both my licks, and yeah, it's something that I have to guard against, just because of the sheer amount of work that I might wind up doing. Yeah. Because in the space of a year, I might do, I don't know how many sessions and then how many live gigs and rehearsals and so on. Again, it's listening. That's a big part of it. Listening to what other people are doing, listening to what's going on, listening to what the song wants, what the piece of music wants. And then also being in the moment and responding to what's happening. And that applies even to stuff that is super arranged, where like when I've been on like if you're on tour with an artist and everything's just completely locked down. I mean, because you have the whole choreography going on, you have the lighting in a certain way, and every song and the drummer or maybe the whole band is on a click. So the tempos are all going to be exactly uniform from night to night. Nonetheless, you still need to try to every time you get up there, make it about the fact that the people who were there to hear you, they're just there that time.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of them might follow you around like deadheads, but whatever. But that experience, that concert, that club date, whatever it is unique in and of and by itself. Okay, so we're not all going to be in this place in the same way ever again. So try to keep that first and foremost when you're up there. Don't just phone it in. I mean, as I said, this is a challenge for a lot of people who do the kind of things that I do. Anyway, that's part of the process.
When you do get a moment to just be purely creative and not do something that's more structured, what type of music do you find yourself being creative with? Is it classical? Is it jazz? I mean, what do you lean towards?
That's interesting. It's rare that I have a chance to just do something completely free, because in a lot of cases I need to work on specific things, even for myself. Even like the music that I compose might have a definite objective in mind. But okay, so to answer your question, it is something I do treasure, the times when I am able to, for at least a few minutes or an hour here, an hour there, sit at, let's say, a piano, preferably, I think, an acoustic piano, and try out some ideas. As far as genre goes, I try to leave myself very open in those instances. I could go into something that's bluesy or New Orleans kind of influenced. I could go into something that has more of a bop vibe. I could just go into something that's very traditional, harmonic, kind of like singer-songwriter oriented. Or I could put on my experimental avant-garde 20th, 21st century composer and get very outside or ramble between those elements. I have to say, at this point, it's rare that I go into that kind of stuff for too long without realizing, oh, wait a minute, I'm coming up with something here. And then the more structural kind of aspect starts to take over and starts to try to formulate it and develop it into something.
That's really interesting.
you've worked with so many top artists and so many top producers. What are some of the qualities of those people that are really successful or that are really, really great at what they do that you've noticed in all your years working with them?
I'd say some of them, it's just the sheer amount of hard work that they put in. And recently, for instance, last couple of years, my gypsy jazz band, the Hot Club of Los Angeles, had the good fortune to work with Jackson Browne on a couple of special events that he produced. So, I mean, we're not his band, but we wound up working with him in these situations. And what I thought was so incredible about him, given how long he's been doing this and the catalog that he has, was how hard he works on everything, and he just goes constantly. And being around that was really inspiring because, for instance, he's someone who could just sit on his catalog. He never has to write another song again.
Right.
And all of that stuff. And yet he is still working on new stuff. He is still exploring. He has still got just a ton of projects going on, all kinds of situations, not just music. I mean, he's making a documentary, for instance, but he's working on a new record, but he's got this, he's got that. He's producing this artist, he's producing that artist. And being around that kind of energy from someone who is a veteran, who, as I said, could just basically just hang out at the beach all day. Right. That is, I think, something that definitely inspires me.
In Kurt Vonnegut's 1987 novel, Bluebeard, one of the main characters gets asked how you can tell the difference between a good painting and a bad one, and he answers like this: how can you tell a good painting from a bad one? All you have to do is look at 1,000,000 paintings, and then you can never be mistaken. What has been so educational and inspiring in working with musicians as seasoned and talented as Carl Byron is how much concentrated time and effort they have spent over the years honing and sharpening their craft. There's this sense when working with someone like Carl that they just instinctually understand what a song needs or doesn't need. They've played so many sessions, so many shows, had so many rehearsals. They've looked at 1,000,000 paintings and are not mistaken about what good art is. And what I respect about such great musicians like Carl, as he talked about with Jackson Browne, is how they just keep going, keep evolving, and keep mastering their craft. What a lucky young kid was I 10 years ago to get to sit 2 feet from someone like Carl and watch him work. And even better, watch him work on songs of mine. And to begin to understand what a professional musician looked like and how important it was for myself to try to emulate that and constantly evolve. As Will Rogers once accurately stated, even if you're on the right track, you'll still get run over if you just sit there.
What's one of the nicest pianos you've ever played on?
Wow, that's a good question. I'd say I remember a Yamaha C7 that I liked a lot that was at the late great I'd say that was one of them definitely that Dusty Wakeman had
Okay.
At his studio. But yeah, that's unfortunately that was a Mad Dog, which and Mad Dog is, at least it's no longer, he no longer runs it, so it's no longer around in the incarnation that it was. But then a couple of, I mean, I think Steinways are still, they edge out Yamahas for me, and I'm just trying to remember. I remember this one, oddly enough. Well, not oddly, sadly enough, it was a piano that was at a memorial service in San Francisco that had just been rented for the occasion. I believe it could have been the house piano, but anyway, I only used it that one time, and this would have been in 2009. Playing that instrument was like that was magic. It just something about the way it was voiced and the way it felt. Acoustic pianos, I mean, just like acoustic guitars or electric guitars for that matter. I mean, they're all individual.
Mm-hmm.
Even the same make, model, year. Just like Hammond organs, for instance, any of those types of instruments. I mean, they all have their little differences, even if there's slight differences between them. They all feel a little bit different.
What are some things as we turn to 2019 that you are working on coming into this year?
The finishing up a record by the Hot Club of Los Angeles.
Great.
Which we're hoping to get out somewhere in the first few months of 2019. Let's see. And then, finishing up some other records that some other artists that I'm working with some other artists, and I'm looking forward to hearing your new
Thank
record
you.
when that's done. And then let's see, I'm working with a veteran, great singer-songwriter. Her name is Lacey J. Dalton. I think we're doing a couple of shows here in Southern California in mid-January 2019. Beyond that, Shane Alexander, I've been working with him a lot, and I think his new record should be out, and so we'll be doing I believe he's going to be booking some shows for that. And then Stephen Casper is another artist I work with, and he's got some shows coming up, and it looks like we'll be going in to get to work on a new record with him. It's a lot of that kind of stuff. It's hard for me to remember how many things are in the works. Right. But those things are at least I remember those things. Those are on the horizon.
Hey, what's one of the best investments that you feel you've made in your career?
Well, going back when we were talking earlier, for instance, about Cal State Northridge, I think going back to school for me was a super important thing that has helped me as a musician, developing my craft and my knowledge and all of that. Now, initially, at that point, I was really thinking that I was heading more toward being a composer and a so-called modern, contemporary, whatever you want to call it, classical composer, and that I was continuing to do all of the work that I do as a keyboardist and session player, that I was doing that to more or less subsidize that career. Now, it's really turned out that I've gone more into being a session player and a sideman. I guess you'd say that things changed a bit. Although I think everything that I did in school, the education and the experience and working, for instance, with Maestro de la Vega, that all informs what I still do to this day. And it was the kind of education and experience that I'm constantly building on that.
That's great. And multiple people on the podcast have talked about, education or investment in themselves or something like that as being one of the best things that they've done. And nice to hear you talk about that as well. At this point, what brings you the most satisfaction in music?
Making good music. I mean, I guess that's a fairly generic.
That's good
way to look at or express it. But yeah, I mean, making good music is still what I think that still drives me. Is that's what keeps me going on, even when things are somewhat challenging or frenetic or whatever. The fact that at the end of whatever the process is, or at the end of some ridiculous day with all kinds of logistical craziness and all that some kind of great music is going to result, well, then that's I guess the reward, or however you want to look at it.
Sure, it's great. Well, I like to end asking about book recommendations or books that maybe have made an impact on you. And so as we start to come to a close, do you have any that stick out to you?
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm a little bit addicted to reading.
Good.
And so I do read a lot. The good and the bad news is that I could recommend a ton of books, but so kind of paring it down and trying to isolate a few that I think really stand out, that's a little bit of a challenge. I know that, who was it? Let's see. Recently, I reread a couple of books by Margaret Atwood.
Okay.
Now, she's mostly known for The Handmaid's Tale, and I highly recommend that. I mean, the original book that she wrote. I know it's been turned into a TV series recently. But the book of hers that I think really got me going on her was a book that I think came out maybe after The Handmaid's Tale. I should double check that, but whatever. It's called Cat's Eye.
Okay.
Which it's the name of a marble, like marbles that the kids play with. Yeah. And that one, just for whatever reason, it stuck with me. And I recently read it again, which is something I do with books that I really like. Let's see. Rilke, the poet, the Austrian poet, who wrote mainly in German, but then towards the end of his life, he wrote in French. And I set some of those poems to music, for instance, for a soprano.
Interesting.
His work has always amazed me. Just the language. I mean, that's poetry, so that's not necessarily books. The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese writer, philosopher, which I just noticed is going to be out of copyright come January 1st. So that means a whole lot of editions are going to be coming out, and they'll probably be lower priced, because now it's just it's not it's just common, it's public domain now. But that's a book that, even though it may have gotten a rep as some kind of whatever, like new agey sort of thing, I think it transcends all of that. I mean, it was written way before the trendy kind of new age stuff started happening, whenever that was, in the 60s or 70s. So yeah, the Prophet. And then, okay, wait a minute. Why am I blanking on this?
You and I talked about this, any Russian literature?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But that's the thing. Just about any writers.
I'm kind of an amateur in that, but I've read this year. I read Anna Karenina, and I just started the brothers. I'm going to mispronounce the brothers
Karamazov.
Yeah, and I'm maybe about 80 pages into that one, and so I've kind of made it a point to try to start diving into some of the Russian stuff, and it's quite a handful to dive into.
It's hard to go wrong with the great Russian literature of the 19th and 20th centuries. I mean, everything through Solzhenitsyn, and then even a couple of other writers beyond him, and some of the poets. It's that stuff is so deep. I remembered a couple of the other books. James Baldwin, Another Country.
Okay.
For some reason, that had a huge impact on me when I read it as a teenager. And then a book that I don't know is really thought of much, and it's, maybe some of it's not quite too PC anymore or whatever, but The Roots of Heaven.
Okay.
By Romain Gary, who was a French writer, and that's the other thing. I mean, because I'm a Francophile, I speak French and German also, but French is like my second language, so I love reading in French. So that's also a big part of my literary experience. Is
it's really interesting,
those books, and I've been in I've gone through this whole phase of with rereading a lot of French literature recently, like Flaubert especially. So those. I mean, we should probably cap it at that, because I could probably go on for days about this.
I'm like, as you're talking, I'm just writing and jotting down notes, and I love it. I feel like I've got a ton of stuff to look into, it, especially because you mentioned a bunch of different like kind of non-American writers that maybe aren't mainstream as much as you might see, and so that's really interesting to hear about.
You can't forget Orhan Pamuk, the Turkish writer, also. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, the Museum of Innocence. I think that one is just pretty incredible.
So it sounds like in your free time you are avidly reading. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. If I'm not, if possible, definitely.
Well, hey, Carl, as we start to come to a close, I just want to say on a personal level how much you've done for my career and for my music. And this is the fourth record that we've worked together on that's coming out here. And you've just added so much to it. And I think, I know you haven't heard the final version yet, but I just really thank you and all that you've put into it. And I know, like you mentioned, you work with so many people on a daily basis, but what I love about working with you is when you come into the studio, no matter where you just came from or where you got to go to, it always feels like you put in the maximum headspace to all of my material. And so I just really thank you. And it's been a privilege to work with you so far in my career.
Man, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm looking forward to more and greater things going on with us, and onward and upward.
Absolutely. Well, hey, before we go, I just want to, first of all, where can people find you and follow all that you do? Is there a website?
That's a good question. I used to have my own website, but I no longer do. The best thing is Facebook these days for me, and just look for my name. And then the Hot Club of Los Angeles, also on Facebook. Those are good places to just keep track of me. You can also look at my Instagram feed, although that's got a lot of non-music stuff on it.
Well, great. And then before we go, I'll leave you with the last word, but anything else you'd like to add?
Just that it's making a life in music, I think, is a real blessing to be able to do that. So I constantly try to keep that first and foremost in my mind. And I would say to anybody who's aspiring, especially, to be a musician, just make sure that you feel that way about music, because otherwise it's a tremendously challenging and can be very, very difficult way to try to make a life for yourself. So you really have to love it beyond measure. Otherwise it can be, well, it can be quite difficult. So make sure that you really want to do that for your life. As I said, I try to live by that myself.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the Beautiful Work Podcast, featuring the great keyboardist and composer and writer Carl Byron. You can hear some of Carl's music at reverbnation.com/carlbyron.com. That's BYRON. And Carl is on a number of past and current and future recordings coming out of the Los Angeles area. So always keep your ears peeled for what he is working on. Fantastic musician and person, as you just heard. Please feel free to check out more episodes with other great artists on the website, dankrikorian.com, or on Spotify or iTunes, The album Grandeur is out on iTunes as well, 16 songs. We have a bunch of reviews and press rolling in on it at the moment, and we'll be bringing you those, and I'm so excited it's doing well, and hope you get a chance to go check it out and listen to it. As always, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. We'll see you soon.